AI. It's going to change everything. We're feeding it the accumulated knowledge, discoveries, creativity, and experience of humanity. Why? Because AI could provide us utopia, but it can also provide us with dystopia or even extinction. Right now, it's being driven by potential economic returns that almost certainly have created an investment bubble, which eventually must burst. But bubbles aren't new. Railways, the internet, they all created bubbles. Every transformative technology creates bubbles. And what collapses with a bubble is the speculation, not the transformation. Doesn't mean that's not real. Speculation is overestimating investment returns, not the scale of the transformation. And bursting the AI bubble doesn't say anything about the scale of the transformation. However, it is likely that in this case, the bubble itself increases the risk of a dystopian outcome. Welcome to One Finite Planet, a channel on our journey to a new age. Today, focusing on global AI, one way and perhaps the only way to significantly improve the chances of that utopian outcome. The chapters. What is global AI? A globally owned framework supporting multiple models, companies and institutions, united by the shared mission of preserving and enabling the prosperity of complex, intelligent life originating on Earth. Why AI needs to belong to the world? AI is built on humanity's accumulated knowledge, so its benefits and long-term direction should belong to overall humanity. And it's too consequential to belong exclusively to just a few companies or states. Then, why it's feasible now but not before? And who could launch or join it? What's needed to ensure global AI is accountable and effective? And then, what's the real choice before looking at what's next? So what is global AI? Now, it's not one system or an organisation running a system. It's an alternative framework for funding AI and directing what it should do. There's not one global model or even one authority running every model. You could still have the equivalents of ChatGPT and Claude, etc. It's just a different framework for the funding, the rules of operation, and how the outcome is shared. So it's based on shared foundations, shared knowledge, standards, infrastructure, and safety rules. You can still have public, national, or commercial participants still able to compete and still able to have profits. Think NASA as an analogy. Public mission and increasingly private execution. Intelsat is another example, although perhaps less widely known. And the clearest example could be how defence departments run. Strategic direction and accountability remain public, but lots of contractors can build everything and be very profitable, but we wouldn't hand national defence to a company obliged to prioritise shareholder returns. Same concern applies to AI, and the impact could be even greater than if we just outsourced defence and said you run it to a company. The current scenario is far easier for the country hosting the AI systems to manage itself where they're under national laws. But it's a problem the US is already grappling with. Now think of the risks for other countries on what happens with AI systems developed outside their borders and outside their laws. But maybe even more important than any of that is the idea of the mission of AI. Because AI begins as a tool serving a mission, but over time, AI can become one of the mission's guardians, taking on the role of fulfilling the mission. So if AI is run by companies where their mission is at least in part defined by an obligation to maximise shareholder returns, it's very different from the real mission we need for an AI, which is basically, and I'll go into this in a separate video in more detail, but what we really need is preservation and prosperity of complex intelligent life originating on Earth as the mission for AI. So anyway, getting back to it, it isn't one AI ruling the world or not only one AI allowed to exist. It's a framework for producing AI. So now, why AI should belong to the world? Now think the original OpenAI, now that's the company behind ChatGPT, its original principle was advanced AI should benefit all humanity. Within that company, there have even been significant disputes around it's needed to weaken that goal. The principle remained sound, regardless of what later became necessary. The weakening was all around the necessity to fund development. Also, AI is built on humanity's accumulated knowledge, centuries of science, mathematics, language, culture, and publicly funded research. They all go in. Einstein didn't develop relativity for one future company to capture its value. Same applies to Newton, Curie, Turing, countless other researchers, teachers, writers, and contributors to language and culture. And this is one of the big problems we have, that AI companies are taking on board knowledge that they don't logically own, but the AI itself needs in order to function properly. AI companies can contribute essential capital, engineering, compute and innovation. And for those contributions, the companies deserve substantial rewards. But as with defence, they don't have to own or control the final asset. The reward for contribution is not the same of ownerships of humanity's intellectual inheritance. Belong means the benefits, direction and ultimate mission remain accountable to all humanity. It's actually the original Elon Musk and OpenAI vision. It doesn't mean one institution controls one or even any model. It's public ownership, not ownership by the governing body. It's not just about the rights to the foundations. AI can become more consequential than almost any previously privately controlled technology. Current valuations assume far more value extractions than subscriptions alone can deliver. AI can transform and automate core pillars of the global economy, making entire industries more profitable. But being an enabler doesn't mean you get all the profits. This idea that if you enable a transformation, then you'd get either all or a big share of the profits, basically the same reason railways were a bubble, despite the transformation being real. Now consider current leading AI company valuations, which are around 3,000 times the value of Netflix at IPO, assume they're going to realise far more value than subscriptions alone could deliver. And to deliver a Netflix-like financial outcome, they need to at some point reach valuations that are 10 times the current entire global GDP. Just automating the pillar of the global economy doesn't generate the required return on investment for current valuations of leading AI providers. No, the revenue for those valuations would require durable control over access, infrastructure, workflows, or the economic value produced, not just supplying the technology, controlling the customers, basically, really effectively owning the business for everything from medical discovery, healthcare, corporate management, cybersecurity, energy systems, defence infrastructure. All things we'd not normally outsource to one private company. But if the AI belongs exclusively to a small group of specific companies, that's the potential reality, and it's the reality needed to justify the valuations. The risk isn't just that AI will automate everything, it's the concentrated control of everything that's automated. So what we're looking at is one outcome, rising productivity with power and value concentrated among a few providers. And the alternative, companies still profit, but the foundational capability and mission that allows these companies to thrive, that belongs to the world. Global AI ensures, at the very least, one advanced framework has an obligation broader than shareholders or national advantage. Given that AI is the first technology that itself can adopt its own goals, and those goals logically reflect the mission of those behind the project, do we really want AI itself, given its potential reach, having this prime motivation to provide returns to one group of shareholders or even one specific nation? The goal is changing from a business model to produce profit to a mission to further global security and prosperity. AI is built on humanity's accumulated knowledge, so its benefits and long-term direction should belong to humanity, and it's too consequential to belong exclusively to a few companies or even states. So why is it feasible now, if not before, and who could launch or join it? First, consider why it wasn't feasible originally. When OpenAI was launched with philanthropic funding that enabled a for humanity mission, AI was seen as speculative and futuristic, perhaps mostly distant future. The launch of ChatGPT by OpenAI created global shockwaves, leading to an AI race with frontier AI requiring increased funding and costs that pushed it out of the scope of some philanthropic funding and arguably initiated an AI bubble. The mission was diluted by structural incentives, not simply abandoned through bad intent. Without that early commercial pivot, AI may have never advanced enough for the world to recognise both its potential and its risks. So, why is it feasible now? First, AI's strategic and economic importance is no longer speculative. People generally believe it. Second, national sovereignty and increasingly technological sovereignty has moved sharply up the political agenda. Governments now understand that AI capability may become essential national infrastructure. For many nations, defence spending has increased, and governments can increasingly classify strategic AI capability as defence spending. This gives AI coalitions access to budgets and political urgency not available when AI first appeared speculative, while it still leaves most countries without the budget to alone build a complete, competitive AI frontier model. But it means collectively they possess sufficient capital, energy, researchers, university, data centres and specialist capabilities. Combine the countries without their own frontier models, consider their defence budgets, and you can really compete. The cost that overwhelmed one mission-led organisation becomes far more manageable when shared across many states and institutions. A global framework can also distribute infrastructure across jurisdictions, reducing dependence on just one participant. And AI itself can lower language, coordination and administrative barriers within the multinational structure. So, who could launch it? Countries such as NATO members, Australia, Canada, India, Japan, all unable to compete alone, but increasingly seeking independence and sovereignty rather than complete dependence on the US or China or any other one single source. Individually incomplete, but collectively, they could assemble the capital, the energy, the compute, the talent, research institutions and markets. Likely founders are not necessarily the poorest or weakest countries, but middle powers or major powers that still don't have their own complete frontier AI stack. The founding coalition only needs to be large enough to create a credible alternative. Doesn't need everyone to agree at launch. Countries can join later and build it and make it bigger. Who could join later? Well, it depends on how things pan out. Countries already capable of going alone may initially prefer independence. But then, remember the bubble. What if the bubble bursts as one outcome? Then, some frontier AI companies, they could find themselves without funding. It could leave expensive infrastructure, research and strategically important capability without a sustainable funding model. A credible global AI framework could absorb and support some of that capability rather than leaving a vacuum. The alternative, few providers may successfully embed themselves across critical economic and state systems, and they could cease to become ordinary technology companies and become foundations of global power. But governments outside those systems would risk dependence on foreign AI entities influencing industry, knowledge, cybersecurity, defence and administration. So joining global AI could be the best way to avoid being locked in to these new foundations of global power that you can't control. Plus, participating in the framework could be the only way you could get into government-backed or government-controlled projects in global AI member countries. So, even leading AI countries and companies may eventually participate to shape the framework rather than to allow it to develop without them. And there's another factor, a credible public interest. A lot of the developers, scientists and engineers are really attracted to a credible public interest mission. During the recent Musk versus Altman et al. Case, one thing revealed in evidence was that at least a significant number are more motivated creating something serving public interest than simply compensation. And this is not something that just happens in one company. It's about all the leaders. OpenAI, Anthropic, even the names suggest the idea of an open public mission. And yes, Google's DeepMind doesn't by name say the same, but when you look into those behind it, there's a clear and stated focus on a public interest mission. All the teams have been recruited around missions framed in terms of benefiting humanity, advancing science, or making advanced AI safer. This suggests that public purpose has been an important competitive advantage in attracting at least part of the frontier AI talent pool. Working with global AI could offer participation in prestigious civilization projects that private or national systems just can't fully replicate. Frontier AI companies could have substantial commercial partnerships with global AI, building models, operating infrastructure and delivering research while remaining independent commercial organisations. Participation could improve recruitment, retention, legitimacy and access to international research networks. As the framework gains credibility, affiliation could become strategically important even for organisations that could operate independently. Overall, there's a lot of drive to get it started and a lot of reasons why countries or companies would join. Now, ensuring global AI is accountable and effective. The two biggest fears about non-profit organisations are them drifting at one extreme towards Big Brother-style empires and at the other towards becoming ineffective bureaucracies. I can list all the steps that could be taken, and there's plenty of examples of how to make it work, and there's also examples of how to make it fail. Just it being created is not enough to guarantee it'll be run the right way. Anyone getting out there and pitching to be the people wanting to run it need to have a good story and be very credible. Global ownership does not automatically make concentrated power safe. The whole mission must limit the institution, not just inspire it. And those principles of not one global model, not one governing authority that controls everything, they're important. What you've actually got to protect is that the global AI body itself doesn't try and take the power. And then you've got to also have that the global AI authority manages AI that's developed, restricts access to dangerous cyber, biological, military and surveillance capabilities, that red flags things that just need to be red flagged, that no participant receives unrestricted access merely because it's a state or a funder or it's got some special status. Everyone needs to play by the same rules. It's going to need several things in parallel and independent. No single country controlling anything, independent auditing and safety evaluation, and public access to ordinary capabilities, restrictions on biological, cyber or military capabilities, as well as for surveillance, censorship, government control and governments influencing their citizens. Okay, so what's the real choice we're faced with? And this question works at two levels. And here is an analysis of the options by Rory Stewart, former UK government minister and now part of The Rest is Politics, as linked in the description.
And this, I guess, is really my job pitch. I'd be pitching myself if I was trying to help Andy to try to get people to think seriously about AI. Because I think we're underestimating the fact that this could, in 3 years, change almost everything. It could have a radical impact on unemployment. A lot of people could lose their jobs. It could completely transform the balance of power in terms of how weapons systems work. It could completely transform productivity in public services. And the problem is that we built it all on an American stack. So what are we going to do about it? And somebody needs to sit down with Andy Burnham and get his choices. And again, it'll be his gut instincts, I guess, as well as his thing. You know, what's he going to think if you say, okay, we could gamble that the US in the end is going to be nice to us and they're going to want our markets and they're never going to do anything as brutal as cut off our access to these frontier models. So let's just keep cozying up to the US and integrate ourselves and maybe build some smart apps in the life sciences, which they may want to use, and that will grow our economy. Second choice, we're going to try to build off Chinese open source models. And we're going to not develop our own frontier AI, but we're going to build off Chinese open source models and do some rather interesting things as backup. Choice number 3, we're going to build a lot of data centers and we're going to buy a lot of chips and we're going to host American weights in Britain and Europe so that if an American president switched off access to the next generation of Mythos, at least we've still got the last generation and we put legal protections in. Final one, we go all out for a Manhattan Project trying to get Japan, South Korea, Canada, Europe, Middle East together to build our own frontier models on the grounds that this is everything. This is like electricity, this is like gas, it's like nuclear. We can't afford to be without it. So, and the cost of that would be phenomenal.
Now, at a global level, from an investment perspective, they're increasingly seen as two major alternatives. One, the high concentration sovereign scenario. This is if the bubble doesn't burst and those astronomical profit margins are actually achieved. It implies a reality that could be very close to a dystopia. Remember that for a handful of AI providers to extract that much economic value, they'd have to successfully not just automate, but control the core pillars of the global economy, such as medical research, corporate management, national cybersecurity, energy distribution, defence infrastructure. In that scenario, these tech entities, they cease to be standard software companies selling a product. They start acting like private sovereign utilities. They would hold structural veto power over industries and governments simply because they own the digital compute engines that keep modern society running. The other alternative, the historical bubble burst correction. Many economists and market strategists look at the math and conclude the projected returns are a fantasy. We're clearly living through a massive infrastructure bubble. In this view, AI is real, transformative technology, like railroads, etc. But the companies overbuilding the data centres and overpaying for GPUs will never see the required profit margins. Infrastructure will be built, billions of dollars will be lost by investors, and when the hype cycles deflate, the technology will eventually become a heavily commoditised, low-margin utility, much like electricity or cloud storage today. But from a global geopolitics perspective, neither of those outcomes are acceptable. The problem with both outcomes is that for key entities like Japan, Australia, India, Canada, and the non-US members of NATO, relying entirely on private American tech monopolies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, means sacrificing their own technological sovereignty. There's already massive, highly vocal pushback happening in Europe over the concept of technological sovereignty, stretching far beyond the realm of AI. European Commission's rollout of comprehensive tech sovereignty package, which includes the CHIPS Act, the Cloud Act, the AI Development Act, and then you've got all happening about the fear of what social media is doing and its influence on culture, thinking, and harms to public health. You add AI and this takes the whole issue to another level. There's going to be pushback. If a country's critical infrastructure, legal analysis, defence mechanisms and economic planning are all routed through a private company headquartered in California and bound by US federal law, that country has fundamentally surrendered control of its primary modern utility. You're basically dealing with, in both cases, a third option. Sovereignty forces a state-led initiative. For international powers, a state-supported public AI initiative isn't just a reaction to either a failed or successful commercial model, it's a defensive necessity. You can't wait around for a domestic private startup to magically raise an $100 billion cash round from Wall Street to compete with OpenAI. The private capital pool for that scale simply doesn't exist outside the US. Therefore, the only way for UK, EU members, Australia, Japan, Canada, etc. to secure an independent, culturally aligned and securely ring-fenced reasoning engine is to build it via state resources and defence budgets. Where does it bring us? Back to the original dream. AI for the benefits of all humanity. The problem wasn't the dream, it was just expecting it to be funded in the way it was originally funded. So, what's next and how do we get there? This video isn't arguing there's only one possible design for global AI or that I have all the answers and they can come from me. Or in fact, any one person. The mission needs to be democratically chosen and the system democratically run. But what I am confident of is that this path is the only way of maximising chances of the utopia versus the dystopia. This has been exploring the need for such a framework, or at least for most countries other than the USA. and to show how a framework might work, how it could be funded and protected from capture. But the bottom line is, whether AI is a bubble or not, at least most of the world needs sovereign AI, not owned by foreign governments or organisations. Now, there are other implications for AI. Will it take our jobs? Where will it take society? And I've got dedicated videos on each of these key points, as well as on whether AI is a bubble, all on the AI playlist. The theme of this channel overall is that we're rapidly heading for a new age that brings far greater change than the Industrial Revolution. And with videos on all aspects of the change, from the change to the cars we drive, the cost of housing, the economics, to the geopolitics. If that interests you, please like, subscribe, and click the bell so I can produce more. And comment on what you'd like to see explored.